So, welcome to our session for AMTOC 2026. My name's Paul Swan and my colleague Narelle, and our topic today is really about additive thinking, and we hope to expand on some AMTOC material we tried in 2024. We have to go way back to then and see how it all connects. But just to remind you of the topic so that you're prepared for what we're about to talk about, we're asked to look at something that's changed the way we teach mathematics. We think it's really about a focus on additive thinking. That's not to say that multiplicative thinking isn't important, but really what we wanted to focus on here is how when we develop this thinking linked with an idea of recall or fluency, it will help. And the two pieces of research that we found very handy, one that we've quoted before by Geary and his colleagues, but we thought we'd bring an Australian flavour into this, in fact quite a Victorian flavour, by quoting some research by Sarah Hopkins and James Russo and Siegler. And you'll recognise James because he's going to be in the AMTOC Conference as well. So I'll just pass over to my colleague Narelle, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what we're going to focus on.
Yeah, so when we looked last time, if we can go to the slide with the key predictors. Yeah. When we presented last year, we looked at the skills that were predictive of difficulty for quite young children. So we were looking at which is worth more out of two numbers, being able to fluently go forwards and backwards from any number. And our last presentation was saying they were the things that we really needed to develop really robust understanding and fluency with. We spoke in that about a mental number line, and just keep that in your mind's eye because we're going to be coming back to that mental number line today. The other two predictors that are predictive of difficulty with the younger children, but not as predictive, is working memory and sabotaging, or for those of you in Canberra, supertizing. They were for the younger children, but today we're doing that last one, which is where it's slightly older. You're talking about the end of year 2. This is the skill that is key to identifying your children who are at risk in mathematics. Do you want to elaborate on it?
Well, just a reminder, so we've asked to talk about the research, so just take us to the slide there.
Yep.
So this is the research if you wanted to look at it.
That it all comes from.
Yep, this is the focus here. And as we worked our way through that a little bit.
Yeah.
What we want to do is focus on basic addition facts. Now, that might not seem all that sexy a title, so to speak.
Oh, come
but
on.
It's sort of like, it sounds a bit old school, but it's fairly clear to us that perhaps we haven't paid enough attention to it. And we're not just talking about knowing your 4 and 3, 7.
I was going to say, what is a basic
much
addition fact?
It's much broader than that. So if we were to define it, we're talking about a single digit, add to another single digit number, gives us a whole. We must say part, single digit part, and a single digit part, and we add and we get the whole. So that's one thing we're talking about here. But the research really has affected our thinking in terms of, it's not just knowing some stuff, it's about making links. You mentioned number line, for example, and it's making links, what we're going to call additive thinking, or you might know in terms of a part-whole diagram.
I was going to say, does additive thinking, is it just about addition?
No way.
It says additive.
That's right.
What else does it include?
So what we're linking is, so if we know 7 and 2 is 9, one of the things we want to know is that the two parts, so one part was 7, another part was 2, that they could be swapped around.
I tell you what, come down to the visualizer, and as you're talking about that, so you were talking about these are both single digit parts.
Yep.
So we can say the parts of 5 and 3, just ones I prepared earlier, are equal to the whole of 8.
Correct.
And you just gave us one
now
addition.
We could.
So that
now,
was
5
add 3 equals 8.
Yep.
5 and 3.
And then we could rearrange those parts.
Why would we do that?
Okay, so fancy known as the commutative property of addition.
Yes.
So we've got that one. That's a very useful part. Well, it's not just your basic addition. It's not just a number. We're now developing some algebraic type thinking, which we'll come to in a minute. Now, the other bits about the algebraic or the part-whole thinking that develops it is when you have a missing part. Let's hold on that one.
Ooh, spoiler alert for the end.
Let's end in that point there. And we're not just talking about knowing that 5 and 3 is 8.
Yes.
Okay? And that's the big deal.
And just before you go off, we were talking about additive thinking being more than just addition.
Yes.
So there's something else I need to write on here to really be additive
so if
thinking.
we took away 5.
Oh, hold on. So the whole of 8,
and we subtract
the
5,
part of 5 equals the part of 3.
Correct.
That's got a fancy name where you relate addition to subtraction.
Okay, so you're looking for the word inverse there.
I am.
Inverse operator.
That's right. And now, is that all I can do?
Well, I hope we could take away or subtract the part of 3.
So the whole of 8, subtract the part of 3, equals the part of 5. So the whole of 8, subtract the part of 3, equals the part of 5. And you're saying that additive thinking
very important.
is actually connecting all of the addition and the subtraction. It's not just adding.
And that's not to take away from a thing called multiplicative thinking, which we're not going into today at all. But as you'll see as we progress through here, one, is going to help us to recall some basic number facts. But not only that, it's going to help us later with the development of word questions, which is, of course, another whole topic, but you'll see how it all interconnects as we go.
And you need the additive thinking to solve the multiplicative, because then you end up just, adding them together.
Okay, so one of those things we just talked about was subitizing. So we're just going to talk about that just
so what is
briefly.
Subitizing or supertizing?
Basically, I can see, in this case, we're going to have some cubes, but I said you'll see it here.
Yes.
I can see at a glance without counting.
Oh, okay.
And the without counting bit is bit. So Narelle's just setting up some cubes.
So I would like that.
Pretty
I
hard to
cannot see. I would have to count with one-to-one correspondence. However, if I make them like this, I can see now I don't. Hold on.
Yep.
There we go. Move them out from under our face. I can now see without counting the whole of 8. Subtract a part of 4 is a part of 4. But this doesn't match.
No.
Here.
So could we have a part of 5? And could you make that for us in, I'm going to call it standard subitizing pattern?
Okay. So I'm not going to add any more blocks because I still want the whole of 8. But if I did something like this, I can, and repartitioned the quantities, I can still see now a whole of 8 with a part of 5 and a part of 3. So if I matched each of these, I could have the part of 5, add the part of 3, is the whole of 8. And you could do that for each of those with that.
Okay, so our focus is not that today, but if you wanted to read more...
But that's the seeing without counting, which will link into what we're talking about today.
So if you want to read more about that, please download this little article. We wrote it originally for the Mathematical Association of New South Wales, but just talking that through a little bit, the QR code will take you to that spot. But I guess what we also need to be careful about here is, even when we try and use individual or what I'm going to call countable items there, and even if we try and use in a subitized way, there are some kids for whom they're still going to go...
They do this, and the way I use the counters in the subitize, that's the gold. That's what we want. However, what we end up with is children using them like counting, and they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, and at very worst case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, a little bit better, 5, 6, 7, 8. But they're still counting because, as you said, what did you call these things? You called
they're
them
discrete or countable items.
Objects. So because they are countable, children often, and those who are lacking confidence, don't use them in a partitioned and subitized way. Because they are countable, they revert to counting just to be sure.
So commonly they refer to a count-all strategy, and later we're going to refer to the research with Hopkins and Russo and Siegler, and they talk a little bit about that, and you'll be able to read that for yourself. Yeah. But let's just go a step further on this same idea, and let's talk about some derived strategies.
Yes, so back there, and then we want to connect. So where I had the 4 and 4, we want to long-term, you can see this is quite visual.
Yes.
So we're going to talk later about cognitive load theory with combining our verbal with our visual. Yep. We want them to go together. So this is one way that we can go from 4 and 4, and we discussed making that 5 and 3. This is still with the countable objects. So ideally what we want to do is move from what we could call concrete or countable objects up there. These, if I did put them, would be the same length as the bond blocks. So there'd be 8 there. I'm just going to do a C for countable or concrete.
So
this
notice,
is
so
my A for abstract.
Now I've noticed here that we're focusing, when you put those cubes together, you're really focused on that length idea, which also is going to come out a little bit in when it turns about length, because often people, one of these, for want of a better word, the strategy helps you move on. People talk about the use of the number line. And we'll try and link those as we go.
And so this could also be the 4 and 4.
Which is what you started with those counters
originally. And so when I'm going from the countable stuff that we ideally arrange so it's not counted, if you're focusing on additive thinking, we've just found a lot of students are still getting stuck at counting, and they're not thinking, I know that, which is very similar to here. You can almost see that length of the one cube that I moved over. You can sort of see it sits there. And so that's when we talk about the cognitive load, that's a very visual picture of what we would call a number line.
So you're using one strategy, I can see the doubles and the two things, and deriving or developing a new strategy. So you're building on, which is actually good teaching.
Yeah. And traditionally we've just done a lot of this concrete and then expected them to get to that abstract level of the derived strategy. And we find that quite a significant proportion of our children don't get that. They don't get to this abstract recall.
Okay. And now we want to sort of link this a little bit with the number line because of length. I'll bring up the slide?
Yeah, definitely.
And we're starting from a point of view here.
Yep.
And you want to just give us a little bit of background so people understand what we're seeing on the screen.
So when we're looking at other strategies, another strategy that do you want to compensate? Well, there's different names for it.
There's all sorts of things, but essentially what we're talking about here is, so we've got a subtraction.
Okay.
What might the question be here? So
if I asked what was 13 subtract 10, once children understand place value, that's fairly reasonable to do without counting.
Yeah.
However, if I asked you what was 13 subtract 9,
bit more
just
tricky.
Before you click, that every teacher who's taught this will go, they always forget, do I add an extra one? Do I take an extra one? And there's not a sense or an understanding around that. So if you click onto the next slide, this mental number line, we're not see, I didn't touch those little markers. I haven't jumped, but I have in my head the length based as a picture. And I'm thinking in my head, if I started at 13 and I moved left to 3, that would be 10. But I didn't go that far. So I'm not going to end up back at 3. I'm going to end up a tiny bit closer to 13, which would be 4. And if I can put that visual, that will really support, why do I add 1? Why do I subtract 1?
So hang on. We started this session talking about addition, and now we've just put a subtraction example. And just a reminder that when we're talking about additive thinking, it's about addition and subtraction. And that's part of this key idea of not just teaching one thing, one fact, because you're not going to develop the understanding. And lots of our kids might understand 7 and 2 is 9, but no other links in that at all. And that comes from, for want of a better word, drilling too early. Where, by the way, please don't go away with the idea that we don't think fluency is important. Fluency is extremely important. But if we don't develop the understanding first, then we're never going to get this level of thinking.
And when we were reflecting on Angie's question about what's changed, for me when I first started teaching, I did a lot of the concrete for addition and subtraction with the counters. I did a lot of sketching and drawing for representation, but because I didn't have the block length, it was really hard to get children to understand and move on from that counting.
And the other thing is, I think sometimes too, as our own understanding develops, we start to pick up more things. So, for example, let me pick one example and bring it up here for us. I've seen many children get their ruler. Lovely example of a number line, and I can see why they're doing that sort of thing. But they start doing this. Whoa.
So the second a student does this, to me, this is that, warning, Will Robinson alert, like there's danger going on here. There's danger for a few reasons, because in year one, you are allowed to count, to add and subtract. That's your initial strategy, but there's a guideline. What is that?
Okay, so I'm not going to let you add or subtract more than 1, 2, 3, or zero is an interesting one. And you're going to ask me why, so let me preempt that. Essentially, you're going to lose track. Your head, remember we talked about this working memory in one of those things there? You got to think about what's the number I started with, count on, and then and then you can see them now.
You've got to do the double count, and then remember when to stop.
And if you go much more than 3, so if I look here, the classic example is they're going to keep counting too far.
Yeah.
Likely, if you're seeing children who give an answer one more, one less than the real answer, they've lost track.
Yeah.
And it's not unrealistic. So that's why we have this
guideline is we're only count, if we are going to count, it's 3. And when you think about amounts we can subitize or see, if they're not in a standard arrangement, that's 3. And so when we're looking at developing that visual representation of the counting forwards or counting back, 2 or 3 is about as far as we can actually conceptualize.
And eventually, I just want to be able to do it. I
want
some fluency. I don't want to have to count back 2 every time.
To be fluent, it requires practice.
Yeah.
And if you're spending all your time practicing the counting, you're not practicing those facts like 4 and 4 is 8 and 5 and 3 is 8. You're practicing the counting.
So that sort of leads us to the second bit of research. Yeah. But just on this note...
sorry, can we go back? No.
Yeah, okay.
Because if I could just go back to that counting slide, that for me is a warning for 2 reasons. 1, they've counted back more than 3. Yeah. But you could count 3 solving that question.
Yeah, but if they had additive thinking, they could say, hang on, I've got a whole of 11 and a part of 8. What part do I have to add on?
So for me, that's the double reason, is when we were saying at the beginning that additive thinking was addition and subtraction. If a child did count back, I'd say, is there another way you can do that by counting on? That child's they're not relating addition to subtraction. So
and that's one of the big
double
deals.
warning there.
That happens there. Yeah. Okay, can I go?
Now you can.
Yeah, right, that's good. Very good. So this is the second bit of research, and I had the privilege of teaching many, many years ago with Sarah. But they did some lovely research. In fairness, it was after COVID when it occurred, but you would assume that, one of the things that would happen here is probably kids did more practice because they were at home and they had things that they had to be able to do at home. So tell me about this article. So it's got an interesting title. Is counting hindering learning? So what's
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, what's the
yes,
big...
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
so what they looked at was that single digit addition, so a single digit at a single digit. Now, in our curriculum, we're meant to be able to recall, not use a strategy to derive, but we're meant to recall that single digit and that single digit for addition in around year 2. Mm-hmm. But it's not just for addition. We're meant to recall that also.
Or subtraction.
They weren't testing that. Yeah. And we all know the subtraction's harder, but they were just testing the addition. And what they were wanting to see is how many children were either recalling or using a strategy or using a count-on strategy. Yep. There were a couple that did count all, but not many. Mm-hmm. What they found out of the population, so if you think if that's the year 2 expectation in curriculum, if we were testing 166 students in year 3 and 4, you would be hoping that most of those students would be able to recall or use a strategy that was partitioning based, not counting by ones. However, they found it was actually a really big percent.
How much? What was it?
It's 35% of the year 3s and 4s who were from relatively high.
I'm just looking at those numbers.
Yeah.
Wow.
So 35% of them still counted for addition and did so incorrectly often.
So that's a very useful piece of research and one that's fairly local and fairly recent.
Yeah.
So let's just take that a step further.
So and the next slide says that what they're trying to say is these min counters, or the ones that start with the larger and count on, that was over 30, it was 35%. They were often incorrect, and less flexible because they didn't have those understandings that we were looking at.
Okay, so I think the key word here is flexibility.
Yeah.
And that's, if we're going to pick up the second key thing that we've learned in our teaching career, is flexibility. It's because sometimes you can get so focused, 729 that you have none of those links that happen. Once again, we definitely want recall, but we want the flexibility involved.
And you make a lovely point about understanding. Do you want to talk about the role of understanding influencing?
I think you need to develop the understanding before you try and get faster at something. I can make you very fast at the wrong thing, and that's the first bit. That's what can happen.
That was actually a really important point about bomb blocks being self-checking why we made them. Because if you go down here, if I practice the wrong thing, it's really hard to get out of my head. If I think that 8 subtract 5 is 4, you will see that I'm out by 1. But because it's got that length base, 5 at 4, that would be 9. That's got to be 1 smaller. So when you want to be correct, practicing the correct facts.
The second thing is that if you prematurely drill kids, they will, one, use inefficient strategies, try and do it very quickly. Yeah. And this third thing, once they just know one thing, they'll shut down on all those links. So I'd rather teach well in terms of the understanding and then get kids faster at it. And even the word recall can be a bit tricky. I notice people refer to recall, which is fine, bringing back a memory. Then some people add the word instant recall. Some people add the word automatic recall. What do we mean by all of this? So,
and Russo and Hopkins use that 3-second rule, which is a common one in research. Is that if they can do it within 3 seconds and they're not using an obvious.
And you can spot this when they're going. Tapping on there,
tapping the fingers, counting the lights and the ceiling, all sorts of things. And to me, that's just really indicative of that warning, which was that first bit of research. That's the major predictor that they're going to have difficulties. They're stuck in counting. They're not developing that additive thinking.
Now, interesting, that research was done with year 3 and 4 students. So we thought we'd track this a little bit in the curriculums across Australia. And unfortunately, there's not one.
There's a few of them.
But anyway, we can head here. But as a rough idea, just to give you a focus here, that the recall, so we talked about that recall, is mostly in year 2 in New South Wales, stage 1, but stage 1 will cover year 1 and year 2. In WA, it happens to be in year 3. But we're going to facts to 20, which might mean 18 and 2. So there's some slight variation. Now, if you want to, please whiz on the website. You can grab either the Australian Curriculum 9, what I call a thread, and just to give you an idea what a thread, it shows you how that content idea threads through the curriculum. In WA, same sort of thing. We've got some threads. And essentially what you're looking for is why this additive thinking is so important, because you'll see it'll come up in year 2. It comes up again in year 3. It comes up again in year 4. And then, of course, in things like word questions, it's going to come up again and again and again. And that's why we like the idea of threading through. So please help yourself and have a look through that.
Yeah, and they're colour-coded. So you'll be looking at that blue colour relates to the addition and the subtraction. And you'll be able to see what comes before and what comes after.
Okay. So now let's just sort of put this together a little bit. And all curriculum is based on an idea of concrete representational abstract. Now, you demonstrated that when we were just down on the whiteboard there. There's concrete representation abstract. Just to clarify that a little bit, we've got a picture up there. Do you just want to just summarise it?
Yes, certainly. And I just think sometimes we use the word manipulative as concrete, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the work that initially came out of Bruner, and he used the words enactive, iconic, and symbolic. And enactive is that concrete stage where you actually act it out. We want them to move from acting it out with counting to acting it out with partitioning. However, some students, because you can count those materials with one-to-one correspondence, are very reluctant to leave that strategy behind. So we then use the bond blocks, which are a representation of that quantity. They're representational for 2 reasons. One, the length represents the quantity of cubes. And 2, how you position and move the blocks represents the operations of addition and subtraction. But we don't want children using blocks forever. So we want to move on from the blocks to then just learning the basic number facts.
And in this point here, we didn't have enough space, okay? So we've got some basic number facts there. But Narelle and I would really love to see 5 equals 3 and 2. We would, if you're in Western Australia where the curriculum talks about equalities and inequalities, we'd really love to see that 4 and 1 equals 3 and 2.
Yes.
And all of those sorts of things.
That's the extension of that.
So that's why I want to develop that. However, if you look at the diagram on the right, that's where we want to finish with this sort of part whole idea.
So if you just come down to the visualizer just for a second.
And we'll see how important this is and why this is important.
So there's a diagram on there that looks something like that with a part missing. So if you can look for that when you go back. And then we've gone, so that was the 3. So then we would put the unknown in each of those positions there.
Oh, so that looks like it's leading to the way word questions are written.
It does. So I would think if you wanted to be able to solve a word question that wasn't just in that typical order, you'd probably need to have a fairly good understanding of where this fits in.
Dare I say that test that comes up that's got an N at the beginning, an N at the end, and the word plan in it.
Yes.
Will actually not ask you that pretty basic top question at all.
It won't.
It's going to ask you the second one.
Yeah, it is. And even with addition, I've seen the beautiful 5 add 3 equals something add 5, which is testing that 5 add 3 is equal to 3 add 5.
So look, hopefully, there was a pretty short presentation to the point, but pretty significant stuff. So we quoted 2 pieces of research. Many years apart.
Yep.
One out of the country, one within. We also wanted to show how that then matches into our own curriculum. And you saw there across somewhere from about year 1, year 2, year 3, we really want to have this sorted out. But we found out that some children in pretty good schools are having trouble at year 4. And therefore, our idea is we want to preempt. We want to try and prevent things happening. But obviously, for all sorts of reasons, doesn't matter how good the teaching is, sometimes you've got to cure. And that's partly why you made bomb blocks,
I was going to say, if I can just go on that, in that last piece of research by Hopkins et al., they were hypothesising what is the cause of this? Why are so many Tier 1 children getting stuck in this counting? And their proposal was that it's because we are mainly just using that verbal.
Yes.
And we're not, and to me that sits beautifully in cognitive load theory, that we're not using that visual input as well. So there's 2 channels to get that information. And for me, the visual input needs to be not just in the subitized arrangement, but that's very, very important. But then they also, Hopkins mentioned empty number line, and that's where the bond blocks come in to get that understanding of length. So it's not a counting number line, it's a representation of the operation of length.
So you're really bridging across that.
Yeah, definitely.
Look, thanks very much for listening to us today, and Narelle and I both wish you a great start to 2026.
Yeah, and thanks for tuning in.
Bye.